So today we're going to be installing this Powerplant frame from Beatrush. It's a pretty tidy looking bit of kit, but the reason I got it is that this MX-5 has a turbo on it and has a little bit more power than usual. And one of the parts of the car that's designed for comfort is the way that the diff mounts to the chassis and the Powerplant frame. So it has quite a bit of flex in it, and this car has a bit of axle tramp once you start to get into it. So I've driven another turbo MX-5 that has one of these fitted, and it was much less bouncy on takeoff. So it's a nice quick easy one. It's just 2 bolts to the chassis and 2 bolts to the Powerplant frame. So let's get to it. So it comes with some really clear instructions, but they're in Japanese, which I'm really bad at. So I'm just going to have to work off the pictures, which are pretty clear. It tells you where the washers and bolts go. So time to start. It'll be tying the 2 bolts on the Powerplant frame to 2 bolts on the chassis and chassis bracing. So that will go up there like that. And we've got to remove some bolts to start. Now that I've been running the Beatrush brace for a little while, I thought I'd give a quick review of the whole install process as well as what it's like to live with. The install went fine. The kit came supplied with 2 M12 by 1.25 and 2 M12 by 1.5 bolts. I couldn't get either to go through the captured nuts on my car. Unfortunately, when I'd pulled out the nuts that were there, they were mismatched, and at some point the wrong bolts had been used and completely cross-threaded the original nuts. So my solution was to intentionally break them off, since the area was accessible, use some new nuts and Nordlock washers to ensure that nothing would ever back out. And that's worked really well. So the only install issue I had nothing to do with the kit, but just be mindful that there are 2 different types of bolts since the instructions in Japanese and it's not entirely obvious. The main reason I installed the Beatrush bar was to try and reduce axle tramp. It did in a way. It pushes where axle tramp comes on further down the line, so you can push it a bit harder before axle tramp will start. But the downside is that with the diff and the chassis now being bound together, the vibrations from the axle tramp are actually quite a bit worse when it does start. But unless you're trying to do burnouts intentionally or regularly, it shouldn't really be an issue. On a skid pan or a track day, if you start to get a bit of wheel slip, it won't tramp. It's only on those real hard takeoffs. But there was one really good benefit that I did notice from this, and that is there is less gearbox wander. On MX-5s, it's really well known that once they start to get a bit more power, the gearbox has a tendency to wander, and it's really easy to go from 3rd to 2nd instead of 3rd to 4th. This car does have that issue, and other SPs that I've driven also have that issue. Most people try to address it by putting harder engine mounts up front or using an engine damper. I used an engine damper previously, which I found helped but didn't completely resolve the issue. However, with an engine damper and this brace, the gearbox is very, very solid. It doesn't wander at all under any type of load, and it's really easy to find the gears. It makes sense when I watch the video back of the before and after of the vibration, the movement of the diff. You can see that the end tied up to the Powerplant frame doesn't move at all. You can still see a bit of movement in the bushings tied to the subframe, which makes sense because they're not braced in any extra way. But the front of it is braced up against the chassis and doesn't wander, so that whole Powerplant frame is now really rigid. So that was really good. That made a big difference, and it wasn't something that I was expecting, but it works really well. So if you're having trouble finding gear, this is something I'd definitely recommend going with. If you're having trouble with axle tramp, you're probably better off trying to change your suspension a bit first, though I do think this will probably help, especially in combination with. The only negative I found from running it is that you do get a bit of transmission whine and diff whine, particularly at low speed when there's not much road noise. You can hear it in the cabin. That said, once you get over about 50 kilometers an hour, which is most of the time when you're driving a car, you cannot hear it at all, as the wind and road noise through the soft top is just simply louder than what's coming through that diff. So it's not a big loss overall. Hopefully that will help you on deciding if you want to get this. I recommend it, considering it was quite a cheap part. I got mine from Rev9 Autosport, who I found really helpful in keeping in contact when parts were coming and how long they'd take. So yeah, recommend.